we do have one member might need to joining us online. The public session of today's meeting is, as always, being recorded. The recording will be made available via the Accounts Commission website as soon as possible and is available on request in the interim. Much of the public are also welcome to observe the public session of the Commission meeting today. Those who are watching this morning, thank you for taking the time to join us. You are, however, here to observe and not to participate. Therefore, your camera and microphone are already off. I'd particularly like to welcome representatives from Shetland Island Council who are watching the meeting online today. Thanks for joining us. Please note that the meeting chat function is not in use. Those participating in the meeting will be brought in to the discussion by me. If you experience any technical issues, please contact our support colleagues separately via Teams or by email to the address given in the calendar invite. Commission members, please ensure you keep your camera on throughout, but keep your microphone on mute. For others participating in the meeting online, please keep your camera off and your microphone on mute, except when it's your item. So that takes us to item 1. Apologies for absence. Sarah.
There are no apologies today.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of connections. Can I ask any member who have any connection or interest regarding any items on today's agenda to please state the connection or interest and whether they consider it material enough to need to recuse themselves?
I've got a connection to item 13, the London Scottish Public Sector Audit, because I work for audit bodies that have been to the audit we have. There's a connection, and I think it's significant enough that I excuse myself.
Thank you. Jennifer.
I'm in the same boat as Carol for item 13 as chief executive of a public body that pays an audit fee. I will also be recusing myself, and for the code of audit practice, obviously I have a wider interest in that, but the advice is it's not significant enough to need to recuse myself from that discussion.
And I'm similar for the second item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Likewise, for item 14, as a member of an audit body, item 13 as well, member of an audit body is an audit fee. So likewise, I will recuse myself. And for item 5 and 11, that was convened as Shetland Islands Council till 2022. However, given the time that's passed between then and now, I do not believe it's a material connection. So this is merely a transparency statement to make that.
I also am a member of another body, and just flag that, but I don't think that there's anything to suggest that I need to excuse myself at this point on any of the items on the agenda.
Okay. Duly noted, and we'll make sure that was declared. Oh, sorry, Nicola.
I'm in the same position as Angela for those items 13 and 14 because of my board member role on the National Welfare Commission.
Okay, right. Thank you. Thank you. So that takes us to item 3, order of business. As normal, I'd like to seek the Commission's approval for the order of business. Propose that we consider items 10 to 17 in private. The reason set out on the agenda, our members agreed. Item 4, minutes and matters arising from the previous meeting. Yeah.
So there were 3 matters arising for the last meeting. Item 5 is on the agenda today. We have the Scottish budget briefing and the local government financial bulletin supplement was published today. Item 8, the Commission's response framework has now been published on the Commission website, and a link will be sent to all members and put it in a minute. And item 11, the impact of the Commission's findings for 22, 23 and 23, 24. That will be updated as soon as the annual audit reports are published and shared with members, and then conducted on an annual basis after that. Happy to take any questions or comments on the minute.
Any comments on the minute? Agreed to approve the minute as it stands. Okay. identifying one of the substantive items on today's agenda centre of public session, which is the best value for Shetland Islands Council. This is a statutory report by the Controller of Audit of best value in Shetland Islands Council. The report draws attention to the findings from the Council's 24-25 annual audit report, now effectively demonstrates best value. The Commission is invited to consider and endorse the Controller's report in this session. We will then consider in private later today how we wish to proceed. The Controller and the Auditor are here to provide any clarifications or answers to the questions that members may have on both the Controller's report and the annual audit report as it relates to best value. Helena, hand over to you.
Thank you and good morning, everybody. And I welcome the opportunity to be here alongside the audit team to discuss my best value report on Shetland Island Councils today. Overall, my report highlights that the Council has made progress in implementing recommendations from the previous best value assurance report and subsequent best value thematic reports, but challenges remain in a number of key areas. In particular, my report highlights that while the Council is in a strong reserves position relative to other local authorities, it has been drawing on this unsustainably to balance budgets in previous years. The Council's medium-term financial plan highlights a cumulative budget gap of 134.3 million to 2020 under its most likely scenario. While the Council has outlined a number of areas it intends to take action, progress on these has been mixed and a step change is required to put the Council on a more sustainable footing. The Council has a change programme, but auditors have found progress to develop detailed plans underpinning the programme has been slow, and there is a risk that some projects will not be started on the timescales of the current corporate plan. Auditors have highlighted that the Council needs to be clear about what it intends to deliver and when, and the Council needs to be clear that it has the resources in place to support the programme. Auditors have also highlighted that while the Council reports quarterly against its change programme, reporting could be enhanced to include detail on anticipated costs and benefits from the projects. Overall, the Council has engaged well with communities, including gathering lived experience to inform plan development and ongoing service design. The Council can also evidence it has considered impacts on communities as part of its early development of transformation projects. But the Council needs to increase the pace of progress of these projects to ensure that it delivers on behalf of its communities. With regards to performance reporting, the Council has revised its performance management arrangements in light of the previous audit recommendations. Auditors have concluded that the Council's performance management framework now supports effective performance reporting and scrutiny, and that suitable arrangements are in place for the preparation and publication of statutory performance information. Overall, the Council's service performance is in a strong position. It ranks 5th nationally for the number of indicators in the top 2 quartiles, and is in the top 2 for both its family groups. Cost indicators show the Council paying a relatively high amount to deliver key services, which is perhaps not unexpected given the unique challenges the Council faces. I'll pause there, but let me conclude by thanking the audit team for all of their hard work on the audit, and the team and I will do our best to answer your questions today.
Thanks, Helena. Thanks for your report and the audit itself. In our standard procedure is to discuss these reports by organising our lines of questioning into themes, and we have 6 of them today. So there's a lot to get through. The first theme is finance. Mike, can I ask you to kick off with the question? Lines of questioning.
Thanks very much, Jo, and thanks to the team for a report on a slightly different council. Clearly, Shetland is unique, and because of its primarily because it has large reserves as a result of having substantial sources of income in relation to energy. I'd like to look at a bit of progress since the update report we saw at the end of 2023, when we were concerned about the reserves situation, which at that point could have run out in 15 years if action wasn't taken, and also in relation to the pace of transformation, which actually this report feels as if things haven't moved since then. But to focus on reserves. It'd be good if you could explain a bit more the distinction between as it were, sustainable reserves and unsustainable reserves, because that seems to be the way of recognizing the long-term funding, the long-term reserves. But from what I can see there, it's as much as 10% of the budget is unsustainable. And I see that for according to Exhibit 4, the projected outturn for the current financial year has actually at around over 30 million, is actually considerably higher than had been planned for. So I think that question about sustainability and the unsustainable reserves, and links to that, more about the plans for moving to sustainability. I know that I think there are a lot of very interesting questions about the how the reserves are actually composed, particularly and how reliable the sort of special examples in the reserves are in terms of unrealized income and so on. But I think maybe Derek will want to take us into that. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. And I'll just start by offering sort of an explanation of the sustainable and unsustainable reserves, and then I'll bring in the team to talk a bit more in some detail about the reserves position. In terms of sustainable reserves, by that we mean the draw on reserves that can be met through the income the council has generated, for example, from its investments or from its harbour trading income. By unsustainable draw on reserves, that then means the draw on the reserves that could not be met by that income. So that's the terminology that refers to. In terms of the overall reserves position, Exhibit 2 in my report sets out how the position has changed over time, and you'll be able to see that the total usable reserves have fallen compared to the 2022-23. But as always, there's nuance within that. So you can also see that uncommitted reserves at the end of 24-25 are above the level of uncommitted reserves in 22-23. And the general reserves position is also higher. And as Mike already has outlined, it's important to note that comparatively with other councils, Shetland is in a more comfortable reserves position. But I think what the point of draw out in my report and the auditors have made consistently is that Shetland has been drawing on its reserves in at that unsustainable level, so drawing more than it is able to through the income that it has generated. And that's a point that we're highlighting in our report that the council needs to address. I think I'll bring in the team to talk a little bit about the overall council's approach to managing reserves, but that's obviously something that we've highlighted that, and I know that we intend to develop a more formal approach to how they use their reserves as part of one of their key actions from the medium-term financial plan. Rachel, I don't know if I've got further to add at this point.
Thanks, Helena. Yes, if I can just talk a bit about the medium-term financial plan that the council has. It has uses scenario planning, so 3 scenarios: optimistic, pessimistic, and the central most likely one, which is what's used for budget planning purposes. And that obviously makes some assumptions that are set out in the plan around the external financial context, around the long-term investment strategy that the council has for generating investment income, and around what's going to come through ports and harbours, although the council sets its fees and charges to recover the full cost of that, and that generates a surplus through the volume of activity through its ports and harbours. So that procedure goes generates budget figure with, as I said, as Helena said, sharply increased gap for 24-25 from the previous year. And the council's very much focused on key actions to improve its medium-term financial planning and to flesh out what's going to make that step change towards financial sustainability. So if you're with me, I'm happy to run through those 10 key actions if members are interested, which includes developing a more detailed 5-year plan for hard income and planned expenditure and a more detailed forecast for the gas and related income. Shetland generates income from Shetland Gas Plant as well, with throughput of gas from that facility. The council is progressing a review of fees and charges around, again, generated income from its services, and it's looking where it gets external grant funding in to use that to fund the core infrastructure of the council and what the work that goes on in central core to support the services that the grant fund was coming in for, and to apply that external funding in a more supportive manner in that regard. We talked in the best value thematic around staffing and workforce plans and generating more detailed staffing, and that comes out in one of the key actions for medium-term financial planning, to have that more developed staff planning to understand the staff need, the staffing needed to take forward those actions, and that's something else that's an ongoing progressed action in the 10 key steps. The council's also looking to quantify and elements of its Our Ambition corporate plan and its climate change strategy, and bring clearer links, better links with those strategic plans and its financial planning, so that's more clearer and transparent, and that's in progress but needs further action. They're also looking to, the clarification as a theme here, convert activities into SMART objectives, so they are clearer and more measurable. And the future of the medium-term financial plan is also intended to draw on more demographic information, population and demographics is population a key focus for the council's corporate plan and for the community plan and partnership of sustainable population. So understanding demographic changes in Shetland and the impact on financial demands and support services is also a key part of that. And the last key action is around reviewing continued use of the inflation factor for looking at what the sustainable job and what that means for the level of investment income that would be needed to support a sustainable. Answer any questions?
I'm going to jump in a little bit if I might, because I'm slightly unclear how bad this is. Doesn't look good if we say there's a general draw and it's continuing and the cumulative effect is increasing. Have anybody done, and presumably this is part of the reserve strategy, the extent to which the current draw on reserves, how long will that last, given current expenditure, current cost pressures and current demand for services? Has anybody done an analysis of this? How long will that reserve last?
Do you want, yeah, I'll bring Rachel in on that. I think for me, the headline point would be that, so the current medium-term financial plan assumes a sustainable drawdown on its reserves only. That is the council's potential. So sustainable being from the income that they generate, drawing down.
That income's uncertain, that income's variable given oil prices, these charges not being achieved, that sort of thing. So
Which leads to the points that Rachel was making around the steps that they are taking to improve their understanding and forecasting of that. But Rachel, I'll bring you in.
So the audit team has not done an analysis for a number of years.
is that going on? So that's what they're doing.
So with the council, it's around how do they build generating income that will replace oil and gas revenues to look for that, for the transition to money from clean energy sources in Shetland. And how do we then build that step change in the transformation of services, so that change, so we have, you know, the clearer, more detailed financial planning that links to transformation work that is on for the council. Because the big challenge is how to reform services within the council and how to staff that as well.
people, I'm going to say lack of people in Shetland is a key challenge for the chemistry and for Shetland. So it's how that the work that we'll do in the remainder of the audit on the change programme, the transformation projects, and then that back to financial planning will be the key for it. So yeah.
Right, thanks. I've jumped in, Mike. Apologies, Mike, and then Malcolm.
That's fine. That's very helpful. Just a couple of things. One is just, is the work they're doing going to produce a sensitivity analysis in relation to the risks that the income streams won't turn out to be as good as they are? Because if you accumulate these things over 5 to 10 years, then that gap can get quite big quite quickly. The second is, I inferred, I think, from the papers that that you all felt that the perhaps the concentration on raising revenue was slightly out of balance with the degree of concentration on reforming services in order to make them more cost effective. And I just wanted to probe whether that's a good reading, and if you think that as it were, more drive is needed around the service reform.
Thanks. I'll bring Rachel in to come back in on the sensitivity analysis, although obviously, as Rachel's already outlined, the medium-term financial plan includes 3 key scenarios, which will, and Rachel will go on to talk a little bit more about the sensitivity analysis within that if she's able. In terms of that point around income versus transformation, I'm sure we'll come on to a detailed discussion around the council's transformation programme in due course. I think obviously income is one of the areas that they have highlighted in their key actions from the medium-term financial plan. It is one of the areas highlighted as a case study within the transformation programme. So clearly a focus for the council in terms of that medium to longer term financial sustainability, how they maximise that income, but also then how they use that income to support transformation as well, is something that the council have recognised. I think more generally though on transformation and that pace of changes we'll come on to discuss, I'm sure. The transformation programme has a number of projects, but as I outlined at the beginning, the detail of those projects, including the benefits that they realise, and then the impact of those benefits on the medium-term financial plan is still unclear. And I think that's an area where the council do need to set out the benefits that they hope to realise. I suppose the final thing I would say as well, as the Commission is well aware that the transformation work is not just about financial benefits. It is obviously about delivering corporate council objectives more generally as well. And that's a discussion that we've had around other councils' transformation programmes as well. But Rachel, do you want to say any more about the scenario planning within the medium-term financial plan?
I'll add comments there. As I said, there's 3 scenarios. And the council's looking at what its investments will draw over a long period of time. You've made reference to volatile income sources. Council recognises that. Council's investment strategy for its investments is looking at spreading the risk. It's got diversified portfolio investments. And the sensitivity analysis that you referred to, I would expect that level of detail to come out through the key actions to bolster the medium-term financial plan and getting more detail and clarity around that. But that's something that will come in time. That's not something that looked at beyond the 3 scenarios that are set out just now.
Okay, Mike, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And sort of building on Mike's question to some extent, there's absolutely no question that the council provides very high quality services, and I think they need to be congratulated on that. But the unsustainable drawn reserves has been a repeated theme over many years, and there's really been limited evidence of progress. So I just wondered whether the controller and the team have a view on what the main barriers are to reducing that the reliance. And what's the controller see as the prospects for achieving step change that you mentioned in your report that's required?
Thanks. I mean, I think as I've already outlined, I think the audit team, as you've identified, have consistently made this point that this is a sustainable draw on the reserves, and that this is a long-running issue that the council needs to address. I think the recognition within the medium-term financial plan that their aspiration is to just have a sustainable draw on reserves. I think is important, but I think the key thing is now making progress against these 10 key actions that the council have themselves identified, and which we have flagged progress is mixed. So I think that must be an area of priority. As I've already said as well, then thinking about how transformation and the transformation programme will actually support the ambitions set out in the medium-term financial plan. So I think bringing those together is going to be key for council's sustainable future.
I mean, what they point out is difficult in terms of the prospects for achieving that. I mean, how do you assess that? Because there's probably not an awful lot to go on, is there, in terms of history?
I mean, like many councils, I suppose, Shetland Islands Council is not the only council that is facing a budget gap, that we have had that conversation around the need to deliver transformation, to think about how it is going to close that budget gap. So in that sense, Shetland Island Council isn't unique. I suppose what they do have actually is more comfortable reserves position that others have, comparatively. And I think it is, how they are now going to be focusing on a sustainable use of its reserves going forward feels key. But generally, obviously, this is a picture that other councils are also facing. I think, again, we might come on to talk about some of the capacity challenges as well within the council. And that obviously is an area where focus will be required to, I suppose, drive forward the actions that we've identified in the transformation program.
Thanks. Maybe Jonathan, anything?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Thanks. Maybe before we leave question of reserves, I think, as you said in the start, that Shetland is unique. But I think some of the language used is also unique, because often when I've looked at councils, we've spoken about the use of reserves not being sustainable, but Shetland appears to be different in having this term sustainable reserves and unsustainable reserves. And I could just more to improve my understanding of the situation. The council has access to significant income sources which other councils don't have. I'm not entirely sure how these work their way through the accounts to create reserves that are deemed to be sustainable and then fed back in to balance the budgets. I've still got a bit of confusion around that. So if there was any further explanation, it'd be helpful. But my main question was round about what you've got in your report talks about medium-term financial strategy. And I wanted to focus on the strategy element of that, because I was very conscious in presenting the report, both you, Helena, and Rachel referred to a medium-term financial plan, which to me is quite different from having a strategy. And that's the bit I'm really struggling with, was where the council is currently. I think got some assurance when it was helpful to go through the 10 actions, Rachel, but I think my big concern is the pace that needs to happen now to deliver on that, the resourcing available within the council to deliver on that. And as the chair said, the risks attached to that. If one of the big risks is around about investment returns, sources of income, how that feeds through, I get the impression the council's done the basics in terms of the number crunching, the scenario planning going forward. I'm less convinced that they've got the strategic direction around where the risks lie and how that feeds through into longer term financial sustainability. So I don't know if you could help my understanding a bit better of where they currently are. Thanks.
So I'll bring Rachel in to talk about the flow of income into reserves and through the accounts. As on that specific point about medium-term financial plan versus medium-term financial strategy, we have a separate discussion around the differences between the two. I do think so. The Shetland Island Council produced their budget. They update the medium-term financial plan each year at the time of the budget to inform those budget discussions. So obviously we'll be looking again at the next update. The one we're looking at the moment was updated in October last year. I think what feels key, and we've mentioned already a couple of times, is the actions that the council has now committed to take in terms of strengthening its understanding around the income that it generates, its fees and charges approach. I think all of those feel key to that question that you're asking, really, which is about the future financial sustainability and their strategy to get there. I think, as I've already mentioned, a key part of that is their commitment to sustainable draw on reserves only, and I'll bring Rachel in a moment. But it's also how, as they set out more detail on the benefits that will be realised from the transformation programme, for instance, how that will feed into their medium-term financial outlook strategy. I'll throw in another term there, but into that sort of financial sustainability. I think all of that and how all of that comes together is key as they develop a more formal approach to using their reserves as well, and bringing all of that together. I think is going to be key to that longer term picture. But Rachel, do you want to come in on that sort of reserves point again?
So in terms of reserves, I refer to the council having harbour income. So that's something unique, unique to the islands. So that income stream is separate, that's subject to its own legislation. It's separate, it has to be maintained in a separate reserve. The council, as it recovers its costs, generates a surplus on that. And the medium-term financial plan forecasts against the scenarios what that might generate. Council's other income flows, again, there's forecasts around that, and they flow through the Shetland Gas Plant. The money flows to Shetland and through Shetland Islands Council, that's used to fund community projects and so on. So you'll see separate accounting for the harbour fund in the set of annual accounts that the council prepares. In terms of investment income, there's an investment strategy that sets out again what the benchmarks are for fund managers that council engages, and the council monitors the performance of those. Market still volatile, but the fund managers approach and the council's mandate to fund managers is around managing risk on that regard to have the longer term certainty, but more risk around that. And that goes through the annual accounts and usually around accounting for investment income, and that will move to reserves. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into on reserves. And as Helen has said, in developing the detail of that and the better links between the strategies of the council and the change programme, intended benefits and realised benefits of that will become more evident over time. So as I've said, in annual report and in the best value thematic, the recommendations to the council are to take forward those changes and bolster the detail of those linkages and make the step change. So there's the element of, I haven't seen that yet. That's something that is very much in progress and will be more evident over time. And Helena's projections, so we'll probably talk about the capacity and these.
No, I think that's helpful. I mean, I think in my simple mind, what it really says, a separate harbour account, it generates a surplus. That's basically what the sustainable reserve is referred to as going in to help the council balance its budget. So that's where there's a big risk going in the future to sustain that income stream. That's helpful.
I'm conscious there's quite a lot of other questions on tangential issues, but if there's anything else under the finance section, if there isn't anything more, we'll maybe move on to the next section, which is on transformation. Christine, you would like to thank
Thank you, report. It is concerning, and I think in particular leading on from the use and the dwindling of reserves, we can move on to transformation. And I'm particularly interested in the pace of change. Well, the lack of pace of change, actually. And just wondered if you could give a little bit more background as to why it would appear to have stalled.
So I think there are probably a couple of things that I'd highlight, and then I'll bring in Rachel as well. I think, as I mentioned previously, the programme initially had a large number of projects. I think there were 42 projects underneath its transformation programme in autumn 2022. But of these, a number did not have dates against key actions or indeed details of resource requirements. Since then, the programme has evolved and there are now 21 projects sitting under the overarching themes of transformation. But again, the governance and documentation around these is mixed. As I mentioned in my introduction, auditors have highlighted that there is a risk that some of these projects will not have detailed plans within the timescale of the current corporate plan. So I think the first challenge for the council is around articulating what the projects are and the delivery actions and milestones associated with these. So auditors have highlighted the need for the council to be really clear on its priorities and its timescales. We've talked a bit about staff capacity already, and I do think staff capacity is a challenge to highlight. Again, the report highlights limited staffing capacity with the council at both the officer and the senior leadership level to progress transformation. So I think both of these things are areas which I think will be really important to address in terms of that encouraging that pace of change. I do think it is important also to flag that the transformation report does include some examples and case studies of where transformation has been successful and successful projects have been delivered. And I suppose linking it back just to the discussion that we've just had around income, and one of the case studies provided in the transformation project report is about Project Orion, which is all about exploring those sustainable income sources around renewable energy generation, recognising the risks that we've already talked about in relation to financial sustainability from oil and gas. So I think, it is important to recognise that there has been progress, but I think overall auditors and I are encouraging that pace of change really does need to increase.
Right. So for clarification, so there were 42 and now there's 21. How long did it take to go from 42 to 21?
I'm not sure I have that specific detail. I looked to the team. So the 21 of the number in December of this year, I think, and the 20 and the 42 were in autumn 2022, but I don't know the timeline in between.
No, that's not very it's a basic change. And my next question leads on from that. And again, it's the use of reserves. So to what extent do you consider that there may be a missed opportunity to use reserves in a way that you can deliver transformation, because that's spend to invest mentality? Could you give a bit more information?
Yeah, so I'll bring Rachel in as this was something that was explicitly covered in the BV transformation thematic. I think obviously the investments are not, there'll be a question around the accessibility of the investments and to the extent to which they can be used for transformation. But do think the council has recognised the opportunities that their reserves and those investments present in supporting that transformation. But Rachel, I don't know if you want to come in on that.
I'll just add that, yes, we made that explicit point in the best value thematic work on transformation about Shetland uniquely has an opportunity to use that financial flexibility that got reserves, there are opportunities there. Recognising that, if you're spending, that's not the phrase we should use, but yeah, spending to invest in different ways of doing things, would take money out of the investment pot. So the council has committed, the council recognises that and has committed to developing and implementing a clearer investment strategy to take that into account. Because not all their investments are immediately available for use, but to recognise that they do have that option available to them that other councils don't.
That's part of the delivery plans,
Yes, so the council has
terms of priorities.
The council is committed to develop that investment strategy by March of this year, and has set out in its response to the audit recommendation that this will include criteria for project selection, timelines, and measurable outcomes as part of, I think, what they intend to take forward. Obviously, that's due later this year and something that we will come back to as part of future audit work.
Yes, anybody else on the transformation thing, Carol, anything? No. Any other questions on the transformation? Andy?
Thanks, Chair. And thank you for the report. Reports that we've had the chance to read there. I recognise the phrase you've used, strengthening performance, which is something we've celebrated, I think, in the challenging geography and circumstances. I'm conscious as the Commission, we are commenting on thousands of people working really hard in Shetland in those challenging circumstances. But the reputation that Shetland has had for many years, hard earned, is around forward thinking and a can-do mentality. So there's a couple of surprises that I just want to probe a little bit in the reports for me. And that's picking up the quote, slow progress and transformation, which obviously colleagues have been talking about. So if we've been using the harbour analogy, let's use the ship metaphor. If we're saying that people on the bridge have to make some decisions around priorities and how they're going to spend appropriately, the engine room could well be the programme management office that actually drives the programme, drives the projects, their costs, their benefits, etc., etc. Is this under-resourcing that's coming out of the report actually recognised by the council? Because it comes as a surprise to them, do they acknowledge it as a way to really progress quickly? And the second surprise was reading around the digital aspects, so I'll just throw that question in as well, if I may, Chair. Paragraph 36 of your report, Helena, says that the council is only at the early stage of adoption of digital compared to other councils, which is surprising given the geography, etc., etc. A lack of a consistent approach. So again, do you as auditors get a vibe of urgency around adopting and getting further up that adoption curve compared to other councils? Because it's very unusual for Shetland to be at the back of the pack. Why are they at the back and not at the forward? Do you get a vibe of urgency as you're picking up the feel of the council? Does that make sense?
It does, thank you. And I'll bring Rachel to talk about the vibe and what she's observed at council meetings as well. But I'll just come in and offer a couple of points. So in terms of the resourcing and the PMO, so the council has a programme management officer comprising of a project manager and 2 project support officers. Now that provides a centralised support to the programme. As a result of its size, it has limited capacity to support projects and has therefore been quite selective over the different projects that it supports. And there's more detail within the report as to how they've divided up that resource. The council has also set up a 2-year rolling graduate development programme to support council projects and their information. That programme started in September 2024 and recruited 8 graduates. I think though that may well be taking some time to bed in, so I think it's probably too early to say at this point. It's certainly not something I think it's had that impact on the programme. I think the final thing that I'd say is that the council has identified 4 directors to be senior responsible officers for the 5 overarching change themes. But reports in December 2024 identified that director workload was a challenge. In terms of prioritisation, the council have committed to improving how they rank rates the projects based on short, medium and long-term timescales. So I think, again, Rachel will want to come in on the buy, but I think there's a recognition of the challenge around resourcing and capacity, and we might also want to come in and talk more generally around the workforce challenges facing the council. I would also say that I understand that there is a management discussion on the management structure due to take place, and I'm sure that will be on the radar, and so that is something that we would be looking to consider in future work. Just in terms of digital, I think there are a couple of points that I'd highlight as context to the points made in the report. One, I think, is that poor digital connectivity has been a challenge for Shetland generally. So we highlight in the workforce the thematic that around 20% of homes and businesses still to access super fast broadband compared to 3.5% in Scotland overall. And now I accept that those figures that we quoted in the workforce matter don't have the latest figure, but I think just gives a sense of the wider challenge around digital connectivity. The council has identified improving digital connectivity as one of its priorities in the council plan, but recognise that progress has been slower in terms of adopting that digital infrastructure compared to other councils. Within the workforce thematic, we highlighted that the council does have an ICT and digital strategy. I think a number of those projects are around connectivity and system replacement and upgrade, recognising a number of legacy systems. But as part of that, auditors identified that each of the services is leading on its own redesign of services to consider how best to adopt technology, and auditors highlighted that a more consistent joined up approach to develop and adapt digital services across services might be helpful. And auditors also highlighted that because the council is at that early stage, it should look to how other councils have adopted digital infrastructure to learn those lessons. So the council has approved a digital innovation and AI feasibility project in September of last year, and that project aims to investigate digital innovation and AI and how those technologies might be useful or might be used by the council. And that will explore different operational models and work with services. I understand that the estimated implementation project is about 6 to 12 months of progress being reported through the corporate management team as part of the change programme, and that's obviously something that we will continue to review progress on as part of the audit work going on. Rachel, do you want to come in there and just offer some reflections on the vibe at the council and that pace, I suppose?
So, yeah, I mean, the council absolutely recognises the challenge around pace and bringing that forward, and the discussions that we've had in audit reporting, the recommendations and responses to the action plan in that regard. So that's not a surprise that the council is very much recognised. I think around pace of digital, the council recognises that it's a small council. I guess it has ambitions and has and it's engaging with others, other councils, shares the good practice examples from the previous thematic work around that. And they're keen to learn, but they recognise they're not necessarily going to be the front runners in terms of limited capacity and prioritising who that capacity is, whichever other councils are taking things forward that they can then learn from. So it's very much open to engaging with others around that line. So pace is recognised and as a challenge for them and that capacity. to meet their ambitions. Small council with big ambitions. But to prioritize.
I guess that small, that's both ways though. You can also be more agile. And you've got more money to invest in that. So I probably wouldn't buy that push back around, but we're only small around that. But thank you.
I would probably echo that too, Andy. Angela.
Yeah, just on that, I think it's the small council, so that they are on an island, but they do have partners. And I do wonder what learning and what resource capacity could be realised more effectively then if they were working, are they working as effectively with partners on all of this, the transformation, the digital that Andy's picked up on, to share the skills set that is there, to share the knowledge and resources that are there for the benefit of the council as well as the other partners on the island.
Right, so based on the audit work we've done, looking at the council and the community planning partnership and its work with others, Shetland very much has strong partnership links with other bodies, both public sector, private sector, and local economy. So, and part of the council's ambition is for Shetland as a whole, not just for the council. And I think some of that getting the buy-in and pace across Shetland has an impact on council's own pace. But there's very strong partnership links. I have some examples mentioned in the semantic report, which I've brought on, if that would be helpful. So there's definitely scope for that, and there's ongoing work around that. But how that then translates into pace of change is something that's ongoing and subject to further audit work for the rest of the audit appointment.
I mean, I think it's an issue probably we will want to ponder. Thanks, Mike.
Just a very quick question on the digital stuff, the feasibility project. It talks about implementation in 12 to 18 months. What, does that just mean completion of the feasibility study, or does that mean implementation? I assume it just means the feasibility study.
Not sure I have the detail of that immediately.
I think that's correct. I couldn't swear to it, but I think so.
To completion of the implementation, the feasibility study. Yeah, that would fit with the timelines we've been dealing with up until now, so unless we've got evidence to move on to, that's what we're assuming. Moving into next thing, which is performance. How are we going to go from that one?
So I'd like to say first of all to commend the council on its high performance and mentioned, you know, top 1 and 2 in certain areas. So I mean, that's fantastic. However, I'd be interested to understand the extent to which that really good performance is because they've got the reserves and they've got the extra money, because you can do well with, you've got a lot of money to throw at things versus other councils who have a lot less money to throw at things. And we already know from the report that a lot of the services are more expensive due to geographic distribution and other challenges, and how sustainable that is. That's my first question. And the second part is, I got the sense that kind of pre-2022, the council was quite innovative and doing a lot of innovative things around its services. And I don't get that feel of innovation in this set of reports. And it's whether there is still that innovation going around, or whether with the current leadership, there's a bit of loss of that innovation, and that then worries me when you then go to transformation of services, and whether they have the capacity with the current people they've got to actually have that more visionary innovation thinking that they really need, because the focus is a lot around the income and less on the transformation. So 2 questions there really.
Thank you. I bring Rachel in to talk a bit about, I suppose, that innovation point and what you've observed at the council. I suppose just on the performance and the service performance and the cost indicators, I suppose it's you know, it's that challenge around correlation and causation, I think, isn't it? And I think to really get to the bottom of that, you'd require more detailed econometric analysis than I think we have done. But I think what the local government benchmarking framework indicators show is that the council pays a relatively to deliver some key services, which, as I mentioned before, is probably not surprising given its geography. I'll give a couple of examples. So, for instance, the cost per primary school pupil at the local authority in 24-25 for Shetland was £12,405. The family group average was 9,903, and the Scotland average was 7,606. Just another example, so the net cost for waste collection in Shetland in 24-25 was £113.59. The family group average was £74.60, and then the Scotland average was £77.26. So I think that just gives an illustration that there are a range of factors, I think, which probably wouldn't surprise us, that influence that cost of providing services. There are areas where the council the cost is lower than the family group average and the Scotland average. That's the cost per library visit and the cost per use of sports facilities. So it's not a wholesale with everything, but I think it is helpful to have that illustration. And in my report, I've shown how cost indicators have moved both in the last year and since the base year. And I think it is important to recognise that 65% of cost indicators have improved since the base year, where the Scotland average is 54%. But I think fundamentally that question, I suppose, is are they gold plating services? I suppose I don't think it's easy to answer. I mean, I can share the cost information that we have, and obviously the performance to go any further than that, I think that would be hard at this point. Rachel, do you want to come in on that sort of innovation point?
In terms of leadership of the council, they're very much open to new ways of doing things. Commented on the capacity around that to step up the pace of change. The council's working with others to create development opportunities to bring more people to the islands, which will be key for changing anything, and digital part of that. But having the people coming to Shetland to have that sustainable population, working age population, to provide services as well as the population receiving services. So for me, there's definitely the intent and the commitment and the thinking outside the box and looking at where we can work with others. So it's not just the council doing everything in the region, what you've got through other parts and government as well. So for me, there's not a lack of commitment or intent. It's around how they move forward to change programme, and that's not just the council services. That's the wider, supporting a sustainable population where people can keep shares, thrive and share, including encouraging young people to be on the island. So that's key for me around how we make things efficient and sustainable. Thank you.
That neatly segues into our key topics, which is leadership, governance, workforce and performance. Angela, you wanted to pick up a particular topic.
Well, it was related to that. It was the role of elected members in Shetland in relation to performance and challenge in particular. I've got another question, but I'll maybe come in after Ruth on that, but it kind of dovetailed into the previous discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think the first thing I would say is obviously just to recognise the improvements in the performance reporting, which was an area of previous audit recommendations. And I think it's important to highlight that. But I'll bring in Rachel, I think, to talk a bit more about what you've observed, I suppose, in terms of that role of elected members, but then also that particular question in relation to performance.
In terms of elected member decision making and scrutiny, I've concluded that the information that's provided to elected members does support effective decision making and scrutiny. And the council members, as part of the audit work, have explored the information that they receive, how they use it. Obviously, there are different personal preferences between individual elected members. So they are engaged with and using and feeding back on the performance information that they get on a regular basis. I've made, so not specifically around performance indicators, but made recommendations around further detail on elected member review of like progress and the change programme. But that building of the performance management framework, using that to build performance information into strategic planning and strategy development. That's an aspect in Shetland that I think has improved. But in terms of elected members and performance, I don't have any concerns to report. Satisfied with how they're engaging with that they are focused on what they need and getting what they need to support their decision making around performance, and through that, how the money flows through to support performance council services.
So it might be a difficult question to answer, but in terms of not just receiving the information and noting it and feeding it into future actions, to what extent is there that challenge and the ambition that we, I think that we see is there in the report? How's that supported by elected members?
Elected members, I think, are quite local in their ambitions, and I will say different ambitions. It's local democracy. Everyone's got a slightly different opinion. There, so I think that comes through in council meetings and council decisions, and there's an element of how do you then get that prioritised path through and a conscious awareness of the capacity of council officers and finances to then deliver those ambitions. So I think that there's definitely ambition there with elected members, and they have, in my opinion, constructive relationships with officers to then translate that into reality.
Any other questions on? Yes, you want to ask?
Yes, I was just going to ask in connection to council's kind of failure to kind of consistently respond to FOI requests and data protection legislation requests in a kind of timely manner, given the sort of statutory obligations it has there, and connected to that, the lack of key documents being updated for more than 5 years. I just wondered what that kind of said about culture, priorities, oversight. Is that a capacity issue? What's happening there? Because particularly with the FOIs and DP requests, there's very clear obligations there, and I just wonder why that slippage is being allowed to happen, what that tells us.
Yeah, I just offer a couple of remarks on that. So I think the first thing to flag is, as Rachel has already noted, that the auditors have concluded that the council has an effective structure for governance and challenge and scrutiny. But as you've highlighted, the annual audit report does report mixed performance on responding to FOI requests within statutory 20 working days timeline, and also subject access requests. So the auditors raised a recommendation that the council should review that progress, their processes around those. And the council have committed to a review of their governance documents with an update presented that was due to be presented to the council meeting on the 10th of December. I believe that's now coming in to the council in May. And that will also include that review of FOI and subject access request processes. And the council has also committed to establish a governance working group to oversee that more regular review and updating of governance documents going forward. So I think there is that commitment to respond to the auditors' recommendations, but Rachel, I didn't have any more text to provide.
I'll not add much to what you've said, because that was most of what I was going to say. The response rates for freedom of information and protection of person, that was flagged by the council as an issue, so they're recognising that, and it's a capacity issue, so they are very much aware and acting on it, and some cases are complex and take a long time, so that's a factor, but that's a factor for any council or any public body, I should say. So yes, it's very much recognised by the council as raised and reported to by the council in that regard, and they've made their commitments for review. Around the review of the governance documents, one, I would say, yes, I've made the recommendation that they should be regularly reviewed to make sure they're all aligned and reflect current arrangements. I didn't note any significant misalignment or missing aspects that I would expect in governance documents, just that they were out of date. And just to say, yeah, that the review of governance documents has been pushed back. My understanding is because that will be tied into management restructuring proposals, which are due to be brought. So there's that.
Andrew, and then Andrew, did you want to come back in?
Thanks very much, Joe. Thanks, Alan, and thanks, colleagues, for the suite of reports we've got before us this morning. I just following up on Ruth's point in that latter answer you gave, Rachel, around digital governance issues. I just wanted to pursue some of that. But I mean, I think it's really important, first of all, to say that if you look at your copy of your governance report, Helen, as controller, there's an awful lot in here to welcome. And I think it'd be wrong if it's not, and others have already done this, just acknowledge that it's quite clear that the council's showing service performance improvement, satisfaction levels are generally good compared to comparative councils and other councils generally, and all the recommendations from previous best value assurance reports have either been met or have been superseded. Now, those are things we often can't say about all local authorities' BV reports that come before us. So I think it's really crucial to say that up front. But there's always a but. And if you jump right to your last paragraph in your cover report, Helen, you say, and this is linked to a lot of the lines of the questioning that we've already had this morning, a step change is required to achieve financial sustainability going forward. And underneath all of that is leadership and governance that we were sort of digging around just a second ago. And paragraphs 13, I think it's 15 of your cover report, Helen, as controller, show that there's some ongoing work. Can you just reference this? I think, Rachel, there's a management restructuring review, which I think you say is going to report in May 2026, and that's going to be followed by a governance working group report in June 2026. And I know that obviously, given what you said, this is ongoing work, but there's an awful lot other things happening around May 2026. There's a small factor of a local Scottish Parliament election, and then that's going to be followed very quickly, months later, by a local authority election in May 2027. So I guess I'm really just looking for some reassurance from your perspective as auditors who are there on the ground, or maybe from your perspective as controller, Helen, as to, are these two pieces of work going to report in May and June 2026? Because they do seem quite fundamental to making progress on achieving financial sustainability in the longer term. They are linked, I think, and that I would just like to have some reassurance as a commission that they're going to be delivered in the short term, because those dates are now just a few months away. I know you can't answer conclusively, but any help you can give from sort of work on the ground would be very welcome. Thanks, Joe. Thanks.
I'll bring Rachel in. I wish I could predict the future on whether the reports would indeed be delivered on time. I think, as Rachel's already outlined, the ambition and the commitment is articulated, and we will continue through our audit work to review and keep that in mind to see whether indeed those commitments are delivered. I'm not sure we can offer much more by way of positive assurance in that regard. But Rachel,
I'll say that's the latest position that I've had from the council. So we're now in audit planning for the 25-26 audit. So that will form part of our discussions. I will say there's been a previous report related to restructuring, but that was a private paper for the council. So it's not being created from nothing. There's work one way. It's just audit work and that's more developed.
Right. That's all good to hear, Chair. Thanks very much. I think it's just the best fact of flagging it up, and obviously colleagues are aware of reports of these documents actually being delivered to the long-term financial sustainability. And I think it is important that they do actually stick to these time scales as best they can. And thanks very much.
Take prerogative and move on to workforce. Generally want to pick up on that one.
Yeah, I'm prepared to be quite quick, Joe, because I think workforce has been a theme mentioned in your responses to a number of other questions, which I think reflects the fact that it was a pervading theme through quite a bit of the report. There were quite a number of references to capacity challenges being a reason why things hadn't happened or had gone slower. So I was just interested to tie that up, I suppose, and say, how confident are you from your audit work that the council are working to deliver a strategic workforce plan that's actually going to resolve their resourcing problems, and that they are being as creative as they need to be, given the geography and the multi-island context and everything else, to actually reference Rachel? They are seeking to think about how they attract people to Shetland and things like that. But it's very specifically in your annual audit report, I saw that the council was due to get an update on its strategic workforce plan in December 2025. And I just wonder if you've got any more information about, did that plan update come, and if it did it give assurance that the kind of workforce challenges are on the way to being fixed? Because it seems to me to be so fundamental to underpinning quite a lot of the stuff they want to deliver. They can't deliver if they haven't got enough people to do the delivery. So anything you could say about how the council is getting on with addressing their workforce challenges would be really useful. Thank you.
Thanks. So bring Rachel in to talk about the specifics of the workforce planning and the service plans as well. I think it is important though to highlight the rural location and I suppose the wider challenges that can come with that around affordable housing, connectivity, as we've already discussed as well. The council has run a recruitment campaign to promote and to attract people to live and work, which includes a dedicated web page that they have. They also offer support for relocations. As I've mentioned before, they've committed to better using digital technology, and they have a flexible work policy that has that they have used to help fill difficult posts. So I think this is clearly, we've identified it as a challenge, but it is also clearly an area of focus. But I'll bring Rachel in to talk specifically about how the council responded to those previous audit recommendations as well as progress on its workforce plan.
With regard to your specific question around did that report come in December, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer to that. I can't remember that. Following up on that will form part of my 25-26 audit work. We're just starting planning just now. And the controllers stole some of the thunder around the activity that the council is engaged in to boost that workforce. And in terms of the service plans, the details that's in progress. There's the majority of the service workforce plans have been developed. Again, linking that staffing to the financial plan, that's all interlinked with bringing in service plans, understanding how the council uses its casual, temporary agency workers is going to be key. That's in progress as far as I'm aware, and that's something that needs to be included and used to inform further workforce planning. There's a high level casual and temporary contracts in Shetland in that regard. And sorry, my thoughts just gone there. What else are we going to do? But around getting the workforce plans in place, service level workforce plans in place, they are prioritising elements of strategic workforce planning and following up on that or again on years audit in terms of assessing progress there. It's good to do. I don't think there's anything else I would like to add. Some of that follow-up will come in this year's audit. Okay, so that's the progress and maybe individual.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Jennifer. Can I just ask a wee bit about some of the practical steps that the council and partners are doing to try and, I won't say address, but minimise the impact of the demographics of the situation that they have in Shetland? I don't underestimate the challenge, but we've heard quite a bit about ambition, but I'd quite like to hear about what practical steps are being taken to try and attract more people to the islands. or to encourage people to work for some of the employers on the island.
Yeah, so I suppose I mentioned already things like the recruitment, the campaign that they've run to attract people and the relocation packages that they offer, as well as flexible workings. And I think, you know, I've highlighted in the report a couple of instances of where that has really helped posts. I think in terms of the partnership aspect of it, I think Rachel might be able to say a little bit more on the detail of this. I think population is one of the key ambitions, I think, of the partnership, the Shetland Partnership, and they have 4 overarching objectives within that partnership where they review progress regularly. One of the indicators that they review is population age 16 to 29. They also measure the number of employees in Scotland, and they do take annual reports on those. The latest annual report, that partnership was published in September 2025. So I suppose it feeds to that point you were making around commitment and monitoring progress and keeping an eye on it. But Rachel, I don't know if you've anything further to add in terms of those practical actions beyond the ones that I've already mentioned.
So beyond ones that you've already mentioned, we covered what we found in the workforce thematic work around that, about how to, you know, recruit to fill hard to recruit to posts by using remote working and that kind of innovative practice. They're also looking to retain people who would perhaps otherwise leave, young people to go to university or college, and some of the NABRI development project around creating that additional student accommodation to boost the number of students that can be retained on Shetland with the University of Highlands and Shetland and that partnership. So that's to retain young people and to attract them to Shetland related jobs. Say the website and the what it's called, that's terrible. To encourage people to come to Shetland, and off the back of well-known Shetland events to have that kind of worldwide view of Shetland and build on that to attract people to come to Shetland. You know, its importance in not industry, but you know, the cultural importance of Shetland and quality of life at Shetland. In that. So
Conscious of time, might I ask my colleagues to accept me move on to the last topic, which is community engagement, and this is in a funding relation and in any other aspect. Nicola.
Thank you. Thank you for the reports. I wanted to ask a little bit about participatory budgeting. I didn't see it mentioned in this week's reports, and I guess just tying together those issues we've spent some time on around Shetland's position with reserves and its income generation. I wondered, whilst the report suggests that there's a good level and commitment to community engagement, how is Shetland doing in terms of achieving the national 1% target of spend on participatory budgeting, and have you got any more insights on that?
Yes, so this is something that was looked at in the first PV thematic, but I'm not sure I'll have more up-to-date information than that. But in the leadership thematic, we highlighted that between 2020, 2021 and 2022 and 23, there'd been a nil return for participatory budgeting, as the council has a very rigid definition and had said that items couldn't be included within that unless it met that criteria. Since then, the corporate management team and council have been considering this and revising and working on a more realistic approach, I suppose, to participatory budgeting. I understand that there were to be discussions with COSLA and elected members and officers on how to mainstream participatory budgeting, but I'm not sure we have a more detailed update from when we reported it in the thematic. I think more generally, what's the audit team have highlighted in terms of community engagement around the budget is that there was a public consultation in December 2024 to get input on the 25-26 budgets. They also ran a survey where they got around 975 responses, which they intend to use to inform the next corporate plan and service redesign. And again, in the transformation thematic, the auditors were able to point to evidence of the council engaging with communities on areas around its budget, council tax and the local development plan. And so I think a clear signal that that engagement is happening on that formal participatory budgeting definition.
Yeah.
I think there is ongoing work still happening, but I don't have the latest position on that one.
That's helpful. Thanks. Any other questions on that topic or any of the other topics you haven't covered in a note? Thank you all. You've given us a really good additional information that we can work on, and our intention is then in the private session we'll then discuss how we can take this forward. But thank you all for what you've done so far. I think that means we have a slight break. Back online at 11:35. The Scottish Budget Briefing and Financial Bulletin Supplement. Welcome, Martin and Paul. Alison, I think you're leading off for today.
Yes, thanks. So good morning, everybody. We have two related products to the Commission today. The first is our internally produced briefing on the Scottish Budget, which is produced for the Commission and the Auditor General. Your version has a slightly greater focus on local government related issues, and Tom has been leading really that work on the internal budget analysis from within our public finances team. We've also tabled the Commission supplement to the 24-25 financial bulletin on the draft budget and draft local government settlement. And you might have seen that was published earlier this morning. But the core analysis on the local government settlement is within that publication, and we've just added some extra detail on certain elements in the internal budget briefing. We've also specifically incorporated some more information about the baselining of funding and some pay and workforce issues that were requested by members at the January meeting of the Commission. Just by way of introduction, just a few key headlines and points to note. We're still at the draft budget stage. The budget is proceeding through the Scottish Parliament, and stage one debate, which is the first parliamentary vote on the budget, takes place this afternoon. It looks like there's still quite a lot of negotiating going on between some of the opposition parties and the government. So I think that the probability is that there will be further changes to the draft budget, either this afternoon or at the final voting stage, which is in a couple of weeks' time on the 25th of February. So just bear that in mind. This is very much a point in time analysis. The overall position for local government for 26-27 within the finance and local government portfolio, it's a headline settlement of £14.8 billion, but that rises to £15.7 billion when you include plan transfers from other portfolios. In totality, that represents a 2% real terms increase from 25-26. But it's worth highlighting that there are very different pictures within that for resource funding and capital funding. Resource funding is expected to rise by 3% in real terms, and that includes, that reflects, compares to an equivalent increase in the overall Scottish Government Ardell budget of 2.5%, so slightly above the Scottish budget uplift. Capital's a very different position, where we're seeing a 14% real terms decrease year on year, which compares to a 0.2% decrease in the overall Scottish Government CDL capital budget provision, which implies, I know the Commission has strong interest in this point, a greater reliance on borrowing to fund capital infrastructure requirements within local governments. The Scottish Government did also publish a 3-year spending review and 4-year capital plans alongside the draft budget this year. We've reflected our analysis and interpretation of that within the 24-25 financial bulletin supplement. What I would want to highlight is it just underlines that if the settlement stays as projected in the spending review, it will be very challenging for local government. The published figures cover only that core portfolio funding, and we don't have the detailed unexpected transfers, but just taking that portfolio funding in its own terms, every single element of funding would be decreasing in real terms over the 3 years to 28-29. Now, these are planning figures. They could well change before, but it just shows, I think it strengthens the messages that the Commission included and put across in the financial bulletin about the need for local government to be preparing itself for the future. We've also flagged that those medium-term figures have been published at an aggregate sector level only. There are no council level figures, which obviously has a significant impact on the usefulness of those figures for individual council medium-term planning. So myself, Tom and Martin, very happy to take questions. And I should also have said at the start that rumours of Martin's departure from Commission business were slightly exaggerated at the last meeting, but this is definitely expected to be your swan song for now.
It's my one camera.
No, I'm pleased to see you back, Martin. Good. And it's a good report because it gives a good insights into this the really, really challenging time we're facing. I'm going to kind of just force us all to look at Exhibit 1. Because Exhibit 1 is telling us how difficult the world is going to be. That's a cumulative reduction in the next 3 years of almost £5 billion. That's the reality why transformation matters. And it's not transformation in 3 years' time, it's transformation now to cope with that reduction that is quite baked into those numbers. That's a really quite scary set of figures. If I was to have the report, can I ask it for information? I think there's something in here I'd quite like to raise out, but I might be misunderstanding the numbers. But it's on the annual managed expenditure line, which shows, which is not relevant and is relevant, because it covers teachers' pensions. And teachers' pensions are fully covered as a consequence of transfers from Treasury to Scotland. I think that's quite an important kind of feature in this, is that the pensions line, both of health and police and fire and local government, are covered off by transfers from Treasury, and those are going up. Wanted that on the record. My understanding of all was correct. Okay, questions from members? Derek?
Yes, I mean, thanks for the report, and I think thanks for all the work that the team have done. So it's a heck of a job trying to make head or tail of the government's budget, to be perfectly honest. And I wanted to ask about non-domestic rates, because I found the paragraphs quite difficult to get my head around them. First, it's not part of local government budget, it is, because they come from NDR as ring fence for local government. So I think what's in here is important in terms of a wider context of the funding coming to local government. So I wasn't entirely sure. On one hand, we seem to be talking about real terms increase in funding, and then it's lower in real terms than it was pre-COVID. And then the rates pool is in surplus, but there's a forecast deficit over the next few years that they need to get back. So I wonder if you could say a wee bit, what does that mean for actual funding to councils? The government makes estimates about income it expects to receive from the non-domestic rates pool, which is then allocated to councils as part of the grant settlement. But some of the assumptions around the policy decisions the government might take, what the impact of revaluations would be, there's a risk attached to that, and I'm not quite sure if it's clear from what government estimates are. I can recall a number of years ago now, as Director of Finance and Costs, I got hold of government working papers, but then pulled holes in it because it was full of overestimated assumptions, and I'm not sure they ever let us near it after that. But I do have a real concern about where NDR is going, and it is an important element of the overall funding for local government.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. I'll come in, and Tom or Martin might want to add. Yeah, certainly there is probably shouldn't say in public session a dark art, but I think it is quite a dark art in terms of how the NDR pool is managed. So effectively, the funding local authorities will receive in year is based on that estimate that's locked into the budget. So that sort of in-year risk is really borne by Scottish Government through a separate account of the non-domestic rates account, which is audited by the Auditor General. So we do have an interest through the Scottish Government annual audit in that. But there has been Scottish Government's risk appetite has varied over the years into the extent to which the non-domestic rates pool might be in surplus or deficit, and how that might be used to balance out some of the budget settlements in different years. And the Auditor General has made successive recommendations about the need for Scottish Government to consider the sustainability of that NDR pool and to have a plan to get it back into balance when at times it has effectively been overdrawn in order to support the funding available to councils. Revaluation years obviously increase the uncertainty around a lot of this as well, and provision needs to be made for potential appeals in that process. The other points was I would just make aware that not all colleagues will have had the pleasure of being intimately involved with NDR forecasting and these things, is that the Scottish Fiscal Commission does prepare those forecasts on non-domestic rate income that go into the Scottish budget. So that has brought an increased level of transparency to the forecasting since the Fiscal Commission was formally established. But I don't know if there's anything that Tom or Martin would want to add.
Just in terms of Derek's point around the risk profile to councils, the way the settlement is calculated is based upon total estimated expenditure and then assumed council tax, ring-fenced grants, NDR are netted off to get to your genuine revenue grant support. But in actuality, it's a commitment given to revenue support funding. So if there is an overestimate NDR, what you'll generally see is an increase in GRG to compensate for that. So the actual revenue funding from the Scottish Government that councils plan based upon is the totality of NDR plus GRG.
Yeah, no, I suppose the challenge is when it comes to revaluation, it's actually councils have paid, I think the last revaluation the rates went up about 10%. So whilst it's adjusted at a national level, I think the implications for local government are effectively getting back what they paid into the pool.
Jennifer?
I just wanted to say thank you very much for Exhibit 5 in the report, because as I was reading the start of the report, I was like, this is all very interesting, but I wonder what it means for our work programme. And then lo and behold, I turned to the table that told us how the budget changes in some way linked to things we were already planning on. And then my thought, Alison, was I suppose the opposite end of that question, which is, are there any budget changes where it might make us think we should be looking at something different in our work programme, because we see, for example, a lot of money being taken away from an area, and that might motivate us to say we should do some follow-up about the impact of that. It's probably not a question for now. I know we've got our strategy session in next month. I thought it might just be something for us to cross-check that there isn't anything in the way the budget lands that means we suddenly think we should be scrutinising an area that perhaps when we didn't know what the budget settlements were going to be, we thought that's an area we can leave alone for now. So it's more of a marker to bring that up next month, if that would be all right.
Yeah, yeah, and I think some of the most significant movements in the budget are in relation to housing, which is featuring in the Commission's plan, but we'll just do that thorough check that there's nothing else that would imply that there is a gap. I think for as a bit of a taster of some of the things that I might bring into the strategy seminar in March, I think that it's more on the revenue generation side and the capital funding side that we might want to reflect on the extent to which the financial bulletin can only ever go so far in those two particular areas, and there might be it might be getting close to the time for the Commission to do some more in-depth work in those areas.
Yeah, I suppose if I can just briefly build, I mean, that was probably where my interest was sparked, because I noticed the significant reduction in capital funding around the climate agenda, and was just thinking, what will be the implications of that, and when might it show up in some of our audit activity? So,
Christine?
Yeah, that's just leading on from the housing question. Exhibit 3, changes in resource funding. Quite a reduction in housing there. And then later on in paragraph 10, due to changes in portfolio structure, it's not clear whether the reductions have impacted. Can you just give me an idea of where they might be impacted? Just for my understanding, actually, of where it's going.
Yeah. Tom may want to come in on the detail of this. I think we found it particularly complicated in analysing some of the changes this year in the way that housing was stripped out as a separate portfolio in year. And a lot of the ways that has then been created by Scottish Government into a separate budget in year has varied in terms of what came out of the old, well not old, but still the social justice portfolio and what came out of the climate change portfolio. So there are quite a lot of caveats to that exhibit, Christine, but Tom knows all this inside out, so I will pass over to Tom.
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, I can't really give you a definitive answer again, simply because due to the earlier structure changing, it's quite difficult to trace them. In addition, something that's worth bearing in mind is the fact that the budgets will be updated. The 25-26 budget was updated as a result of the autumn budget revision, which again we don't reflect in this because we do a budget to budget, draft budget to draft budget. Sorry, so however that did change things slightly in memory. I don't have the exact figures, but if memory serves, I believe the housing resource when the autumn budget revision was taken into account was more flat.
So become clearer then, is what you're saying.
Yes, I think so. Tom works quite closely with data analytics, where we can strip out and look at those portfolio changes and interrogate budget line by line, and therefore look at past budgets and reorganise them to provide that trend analysis. So not only over the medium term, on the assumption there will remain a housing portfolio, we'll see that trend analysis more clearly. But again, through the regular budget cycle, autumn and spring budget revisions, we'll be able to get a comparable basis.
Yeah, okay, that's good. It's just really helpful in terms of our strategy. Jennifer mentioned about what we do in the housing area, just to have an idea of where we're going.
As they were very helpful papers, and very helpful to see the broader Scottish Government context as well as the specifics of local government. The only thing I would say, which is maybe a compliment to what Jennifer was saying, is it rather confirms the work we're going to be doing in relation to housing and health and social justice, because those are two of the most impenetrable parts of the budget that we see here, and it's very difficult to draw judgments. Those, I think that both of those bits of work should be very helpful, I think.
Again, it's a good backdrop and a kind of good contextualising our challenge around local government's delivery of efficiencies, transformation, and mindful of how they prioritise their spending. Angela.
And just on that, Joe, I think it is transformation is absolutely key when you see these figures, because they really are stark. But on top of that, back to an earlier discussion that we had about public service reform. It's going to take more than local government to address some of these issues, and we're seeing the same challenges faced by other parts of the public sector. So I do think that there is a real call for us to be pointing this out in many of the reports that we publish.
Any other questions for Paul Martin and thank you. Partly stunned us into thinking, oh my goodness, but again, a helpful kind of backdrop. Thank you for that. Okay. Martin, I'm pretty sure we will see you again. Just feel it in the water.
No. I suspect Paul would be
Not personally.
gone now, we're quite busy on AGS syndrome until we see you this time next year.
I think it's to item 7, which is the local government policy update. And Joe, in the chair.
Thanks, Joe. Not a huge amount for me to update on since the report was published, and obviously a key area is the budget. That's been covered very comprehensively already. I thought one thing I might just draw attention to is the fact that the 3 publications that the Commission put out in January that featured there, the delayed discharges, the best value on North Lanarkshire and the Financial Bulletin, all had quite unusually high levels of both media coverage and engagement with the report on social media and in terms of downloads of the reports from the website. I thought it was quite interesting. We're obviously doing a little bit of thinking about this in terms of the strategy discussions we've got next month.
Yeah.
And thinking about what is it that might prompt or generate that interest. So that's something I'm looking at, but obviously to me very different types of reports, one about a specific policy area, one's about council finances in general, one's about a specific council. So they all have kind of different aspects that help to boost that engagement. But it's interesting to note that the Commission seems to have a bit of a, I guess, a sense of momentum that its publications seem to be getting more and more attention as they come out. Obviously, the medium and longer term impact is a different issue, but yeah, certainly that initial attention seems to be quite positive.
That's interesting. Thanks for giving us that. Any questions for Joe? So we've got Jennifer.
Joe, it isn't in your report, but I did mention earlier I was going to ask you, so I'm not about to spring this on you, but it's worth mentioning in the public session. I'd heard on the news that the UK government is giving grants to councils south of the border to help them with the debt that they've built up around the provision of special educational needs support. And I'm just wondering, A, do those grants potentially translate into consequential Scotland? B, have we heard anything about whether the Scottish Government is thinking of following suit? I'm not completely clear how the funding works south of the border around that provision versus up here, but I just thought it was interesting that there'd been recognition that this had been something that councils were having to borrow to support, and the government south of the border is trying to, what my inference probably simplistically was, sort of wipe the slate clean in terms of the money and allow them to think differently going forward about how that provision is funded. So I don't know, since I warned you at 9 o'clock this morning, I was going to ask about it, whether you had a chance to have a look.
No, thanks for that, and thanks for the heads up as well. It's something I did spot, haven't had a chance to look into completely. From what I've seen, I think it's quite a specific situation that they're dealing with. Of course, across the board, England and Scotland and elsewhere in the UK, the additional support needs, or whichever way it's described or named, is becoming an increasing financial pressure for councils. I think there's been a long-term process in England where these debts have been built up. There's something called a statutory override that's kind of hidden them from the accounts, which is due to come to an end in a couple of years. And there have been warnings about the impact that is then going to have on councils in England. From what I've read, I think it's a specific approach that's been taken to help to relieve councils in England of that debt and of that pressure when it comes through. So I don't think it's quite the same as the government increasing their budget, which would, for a devolved policy area as this is, increase the consequential. So I think it's a very specific type of measure that they're taking, but it's something I would definitely look into and confirm that. Obviously it's of limited direct relevance to the Scottish context, but as I say, it's something that is similar to a pressure that councils in Scotland are increasingly facing as well.
As I say, when I heard it on the radio, my ears just pricked up because I was like, oh, is this a thing that's about to come and manifest in Scotland as an issue? And we just haven't understood it might be coming. So thank you. Appreciate.
You've triggered a lot of questions. So we've got Andy, then Christine, then Mike, then Nicola.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the paper, Joe. I haven't given you a heads up. West Lothian Council, I noticed, had 10,000 people respond to their budget consultation, which seems an amazing number. Any intel as to why people took up the platform or paying to respond? Could we learn anything from West Lothian and then?
Haven't looked into the specific case, and I think it's something that may well be picked up as part of the budget briefing. It certainly has in previous years. Sort of in terms of that across the board, you know, how well council's been engaging with residents and kind of response they've got. I would just surmise that it's part of that increasing attention that people are paying to the issue, and we have this sort of trend where we're seeing this, you know, a lot of strong feelings around council tax, for example. There's then an onus on councils and others to explain the kind of part that plays in the budget that a council has alongside other sources of funding. So I think it's just, you know, when people have a strong opinion, they're more likely to participate in any kind of survey or consultation exercise. Whether there is any particular aspects to the approach the council took to particularly kind of clearly try to reach people and get their attention, I'm not too sure, but it's likely a combination of those two things, I think.
Absolutely. Resident, can I comment? We actually got through our door a bulletin which we get every month that I think actually people read, and the majority of that bulletin was, these are the things we might be stopping, and I was reading it going, oh my goodness, please don't stop all those things. So I think that is why we've had such a response, because they've actually detailed out every service they're thinking they're going to have to cut, and they were all emotive services like play parks and different things, and it was an easy way to actually respond. It came direct into your door. It was easy read format. It was very clear. There was pictures, there was graphics. So I think, I don't know what other councils have got, but certainly I thought, well, that's quite forward thinking.
And certainly in previous reports that I've done, I've picked out examples of councils who are setting out a whole range of different options, and you're right, it's possible that is quite eye-catching and catching the attention as well.
Okay. Christine?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And thanks, Joe, as ever, for a very informative paper. We're just going back to the recent publications, and you mentioned three. The fourth one was community health and social care performance, which really didn't perhaps get the promotion that perhaps due to its publication date. But given the work and effort that went into the excellent data tool, just wondered if there's any way of measuring the uptake of that data tool and the usefulness.
So some things about the specifics of that, and then in general around the data tool and how we measure these. So I think that there was a conscious decision made with the performance output that it would be something that we would direct to the sector rather than the public. So the delayed discharges one was the one that we did the media work around, and we knew would attract that kind of attention. The health and social care performance obviously supports that, and it's something we can continue to reference. But it was mostly around, or a large part of the purpose of that piece of work was to collate a whole range of disparate data from different sources and put that together to build a bit of a picture, and then really invite authorities to, you know, look into that, investigate the trends, investigate the factors that were kind of underlying the data that included. So it wasn't that it didn't get attention. It was the fact that it was quite deliberately targeted at that audience rather than at a media audience, as you say, with it coming out at the same time as delayed discharges. And I think there was a connection between the two. That's why we didn't see that the performance data feature in terms of media attention. In terms of the data tool in general, I think the challenge that we have with measuring the use of that is that it's reliant on measuring what are called page views. So when people access a page rather than a document, and it's quite increasingly common, I think, for people to kind of reject the tracking of websites that they visit. So it's more difficult to track page views. We'll get numbers, but they might not be the whole picture. But we do look at the page view figures, and that's something that will come through when I look at statistics for how much, how many downloads, publications, things have had. So it's a different way of tracking it. The best way, I think, to see how much that's being used is to see if there's any response or anything that changes, or any feedback that we get from the sector in particular to the content of that output.
So I'm particularly interested, because it's published once, that doesn't mean we walk away now and don't do any more with that. So I'm particularly interested that, having pointed it towards authorities and those delivering services, there's no reason why service users shouldn't be informed about the background that's available in this tool. In fact, they might find it very useful. So I just wonder if some thought could be given in the future to how we could use it or promote it in some way, whether it's through social media links or whatever.
Alison, can you give us what's actually happening with that today?
Yeah, we'll pick that up, Christina. If we want to better understand how IGBs themselves are using it as part of our follow-up work. And we also will come this afternoon to look at that IGB financial bulletin. And obviously we're updating that financial tool every year. So there will be a decision also for the Commission as to the extent you want to invest resources in keeping it up to date in future years, and the extent to which we want to see, and it was one of the recommendations in the bulletin that went alongside the performance tool, as to whether we want to see the sector take this on, and we want to see IGBs with support from Public Health Scotland own the publication and the transmission of their data, something we would, I'm sure the Commission would want to hold them to account for. So it's, I think it's a little bit of a, let's see what happens in terms of the sector taking ownership, but I think it's a good point, and we'll pick up with Joanna if there's anything more we can do in terms of building public awareness of that tool.
Yeah, I think just the very fact it's performance, I
Yes,
think
but if
makes
it's not updated, then it becomes a frustration if you click on it and it's 6 months out of date. So the issue for us is the extent to which we think is adding serious value, we allocate significant resource to maintaining it.
No, I understand that, but I mean, the public has a natural interest in performance.
Indeed, it does. I don't disagree with that. All I'm saying is if we point in the direction of something that doesn't get updated, you could be equally frustrated about not being seen to be on the ball. So I think there's a debate to be had, Kristen. I think it's a valid question, but I think it's a debate to be had about, are we taking responsibility for maintaining it, or is the sector taking responsibility for maintaining it? If it's us, then that has implications for our work programme. In other words, not saying we shouldn't, but it isn't a guaranteed kind of continued development of that.
No, I understand that, but how would the public feel that there was even that tool there?
I'm not saying
in order to ask for it to be developed by the sector.
I'm not saying they shouldn't know, they can, or we can get trying to try and help us get that. But
Yeah.
if you've made it clear to them it's there, I would expect they would expect it to be updated. And if we're not going to update it, we've got to be thinking about what is it we're pointing in the direction of, a static old set of data sets, or something that has.
No, I understand the updating part of it. My point is really if the sector's going to take it on and the public doesn't push the sector to take it on because the public doesn't know.
No, that's a fair
That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, that's a.
We do have the Chief Officer of the IGB network coming to the Commission in March for a forum and raise that.
Yeah.
So maybe they should be making it public.
Mike and then Nicola.
Thanks very much. As ever, a really interesting read, and emphasise just how much is going on around across the board. I suppose mine were more comments in relation to some of the stuff about the budget, particularly the IFS. It seemed to me two things which are really important for us. One is that in the spending review, as opposed to the annual budget, it looks as if there is a significant shift from hospital care to social health and social care. Quite difficult to understand the implications of that, but it feels like quite an important thing for us to dig into. in the future. And the second, in relation to capital, where we know that local government is seeing some further reductions. It's very striking that as prisons are getting completed, there will actually be more money to go around for other portfolios, and it doesn't appear that local government has benefited from that, which again is a in terms of looking at the relative treatment of local government is quite important, I think.
Okay, I'm slightly confused, Mike. That's the previous paper rather than Joe's paper, or is there something?
I think it's from the IFS.
Else? Okay, yeah,
the
okay.
IFS references that.
So that's something that we can be reflecting in our reports. So I think it's useful, kind of.
Yeah, I think we'll probably come to it again today.
Yes, and I think there was as well as in Joe's report, there was a link at the end of the budget briefing to IFS analysis, which is very useful on the Scottish budget, alongside other Scottish-based commentators. I think I might be happy to pick up a conversation offline as well about where some of those indications might take us in terms of work programme, thinking about how we head into the strategy seminar in March.
Thank you. Nicola?
Thanks, Joe. 2 quick points. One is just picking up Christine's point about the data tool. Ruth and I could take that into the comms group as an item for discussion. I think that would be helpful to do that. The other thing is, Joe, in your report, and it kind of tracks back a bit to Jennifer's first point on your paper about the additional support for learning. You've included the reference to the national review announced by Jenny O'Ruth. Just to say that having had a quick cursory look to try and dig into that a little bit more, I've noticed that Janie McManus, who's leading on it, will be leading an expert group due to report in 2 months. The review report will be completed in 2 months, according to the website, Scottish Government website, and shared at an event on the 12th of March. So it does beg the question for me about the nature of that review and the scope, etc., and also who's on the expert group. So I don't know whether that's something that is possible to dig into a little bit more. Need to know.
Yeah, thanks. Certainly looking to that report back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. A useful kind of answer through quite a lot of what's going on in the sector. Thanks again for keeping us up to speed with what key issues are. No other questions. That's it. On to item 8, which is the chair's update. In me. Okay, I wanted to pick up kind of maybe 3 areas of information. One is the visit that Andrew and I had to the Western Isles, which was a follow-up from Best Value, which was an extremely positive session because I think the council were clearly had been shaken by the 102 cyber security report, not the report, but the cyber security breach. But took on board were very supportive of the way people in the time and effort to come up with their answers before we wrote our report, so that was useful. They were very supportive of the Scottish Government's digital security support and the National Security Authorities as National Cyber Security Centre, as giving them additional capacity to deal with the issues. And whilst they've learned a lot, learned it the hard way, I think it has actually been an extremely useful way of them realising the importance of digital and how to manage that risk effectively. The other one I wanted to pick up was from our meeting I had with our Scottish Government sponsor, which is Katrina McKean, and it's a really good kind of every month check-in with the sponsor team And she's extremely supportive of what we're doing and keen to help wherever we can. So I'm pleased that arrangement, that relationship is a really helpful and supportive one. And I think she gets a lot from our reports that we send her, that she can see where we're going, what we're doing, and gives her clarity when she's advising her cabinet secretary. And then recently I met with Ariana Burgess, the convener of the local government committee. And it was partly as a desire to try and establish a slightly more structured approach to engaging with the committee, because we do get invited. It's slightly more ad hoc than it could be, and slightly less clear as to how our work feeds into their scrutiny of the various public sector bodies. So I think there was an interest in re-engaging or engaging slightly differently, but clearly it's going to be the next Parliament and the next chair, or next convener of the committee. So their legacy report, I hope, will flag up there's a desire to engage with us in a slightly different way to help improve their scrutiny of the sector in the right way. We clearly don't have authority to scrutinise local government, but the kind of the wider public service reform, public sector reform agenda does hit the committee's desks and thinking. So getting a different approach, we can help in advance them think through some of the issues that they may want to take evidence on. I think was a useful starting point. So three areas that are useful from I think getting wider stakeholder engagement process going in a way that gives us a chance to influence their thinking, and also gives us a chance to understand, are we having the impact we're hoping we want to have, and if we're not, how do we adapt to make sure our impact is as effective as it can be. But that was the three things I wanted to pick up specifically, but I'm happy to take any questions on any item on the paper on item 8. Oh, Jennifer.
Only a quick question that just occurred to me earlier when Angela asked about when we last saw Louise MacDonald. Of course, Louise MacDonald has now left the Scottish Government and her replacement is Miriam Craven. I'm just wondering, is at some point there an opportunity for you to meet Miriam and just, I mean, I'm sure Katrina and Ellen and others are making sure that Miriam is cited on the work of the Accounts Commission, but feels like that's a acquaintance we should make.
Get too far. No, you're absolutely right. I do know Katrina is keeping her involved. We have a stakeholder engagement paper or report.
Planning every year. Yeah.
And that clearly is part of that, the extent to which a new cabinet secretary coming in, a desire to engage effectively with them, and the new, clearly the new DG coming in, give a bit of time and space to make that work. But you're absolutely right. They need to be on our radar and coming to the commission rather than me going to see them would be a key part of that engagement. I think, yeah.
I knew they are. I just thought, yeah.
Well, as we were just saying in response to Jennifer's point out, she was at the COSLA conference when myself and Al attended, and I think that was on a different table, but I was next to her for the evening, so I did take time to speak for quite a considerable time. But
every time I go through some of these things, I keep thinking, oh, I haven't met them for a while, or I haven't met them. What have I been doing with all my time? So
very busy, Jane.
She's definitely on that stakeholder engagement list. Any other questions? Takes us to item 9, which is any other public business anybody wants to raise. So on that basis, we close the public session. If you can turn off the recording.